Hello, welcome to this second video on strategy, where I'll be carrying the discussion forwards. In the first video, we looked at the crux, the critical problem that the organization is encountering, that strategy from challenge. This follow-on video is going to look at how do we engage with that? How do we develop a plan to come up against and hopefully overcome that critical challenge that we're facing? Just a few different ideas here in this video. This is absolutely not the only way to tackle strategic planning, but it's a model which I've found helpful over the years. I've called it the estimate. See what you think. So there's 5 elements to it that we need to think about, and you don't necessarily need to do this in any particular order. It may well be that we might need to move backwards and forwards throughout this process as the context changes, as you discover new information, or perhaps the opportunities which you're able to engage with, develop or change. So it's a kind of fairly fluid process, this, but really there are 5 questions that we need to think about on a fairly continuous basis as we develop our plan. So the focus, so where I'm going to begin is create focus, that start point. There we go. So that is the crux. So that is really defining the critical problem that we need to solve. So I always try to engage with this by initially thinking quite broadly, but then bringing it back to just one sentence. So if you can get that critical problem phrased into one sentence and then articulated as a question, we're ready to start to communicate it, engage with it, bring people together, perhaps get heads together so that we can start to think about how to work through it. So if you're using the little template, which I'll be sending out with this video, if you can, write that critical problem in the space that's available there, one sentence or one question, then we're ready to really start to think about engaging with it. It's a good discipline, that, and as I talked about in the last video, articulating it clearly in one sentence. If we can do that, that means that we understand it and we're ready to begin to work with others and communicate it effectively. So that's our start point. What is the focus? One sentence, one question. The next part of the model is where we look at developing knowledge. So that's the next bit. And as you can see, that tallies with the Pestel analysis, which is another little framework which relates to this one. So when we think about knowledge, well, straight away, we might start to ask ourselves, what do we know? What are the facts of the situation? What are the what's the data that we have available to us? What's happened so far? What do we know? What are the key facts of our situation? Quite important to differentiate between facts, so things that we can affirm, that we know we have evidence to support, and also assumptions. It's if we treat assumptions as facts, that can be quite dangerous because our assumptions could be unfounded. So if we're making assumptions, it's important to clarify that we're doing that, but also where possible, where can we stress test those assumptions? Our assumptions are probably just hypotheses that might need to be tested before we make any sort of investment based on them. So what do we know? The next element, what are the things that we don't know? What are the questions that we need to answer? What are the gaps in our knowledge? So the things that we don't know now. And again, if we're dealing with a complex challenge, there could be all sorts of different questions. How are our competitors engaging with this challenge? Is it affecting other organizations like it's affecting us? That sort of thing. So these are going to be questions that we may not know the answer to, but at least we know what the questions are. So we categorize those and we can begin to think about answering them or finding ways of filling in the gaps in our knowledge. The last part, what are the things that we don't know? You can see a bit of Donald Rumsfeld coming through here. So the things we absolutely don't know about, and we may not even have the question yet. Even though it can be a little bit frustrating and counterintuitive, what we sometimes need to do is slow down and broaden our knowledge. We may be in a place where we just simply don't understand the nature of the problem. So It could be that we're not even able to articulate what the questions are, what the gaps in our knowledge are. The other thing about this is that as we start to develop new knowledge, or we start to take action and we begin to experiment and move things forwards, it may be that we come across new information that we are unaware of at the start point. So new facts may uncover themselves. It may be that we start to find new questions again as we begin to take action. So I tend to treat this as a bit of a live document. So you may not have very much in that right-hand column, the things that we don't know initially, but as you start to experiment and take action, it's likely that more information will start to pop into that right box. And they're not necessarily problems. It could be great opportunities that we start to identify as well. Funding that's available to help us with that challenge. So for example, one of the challenges that we're facing is working in international markets, and we've started to engage with that, and we talk to government agencies who help British business export, and lo and behold, lots of funding available to us to help us network and go on trade missions and that sort of thing. So fantastic. At the start of this process, we had no idea that was available. It's one of those things which has just materialized as we've begun to work through that strategy. So the things that we don't know, live document, and that's likely to develop as we go along. You can stimulate the discussion around knowledge, the things that we know, the things that we don't know, and the things that we don't know, but with the aid of something like a Pestel analysis. So what this is designed to do really is to sort of encourage us to think about the wider external factors that might need to influence our thinking. So, for example, I suppose a kind of one that sort of links all of this together might be back when businesses were looking at recovery through COVID, pivoting and or maybe thinking about how do we keep our employees motivated and engaged when they're working from home. There are numerous external factors which are likely to play into that. So political would, for example, be what does the law allow us to do? Particularly when we were, at a time where the law became significantly more autocratic than the previous time. So political factors, economic factors. How is the economy changing, and how do we respond to that? Social factors, people's well-being, what motivates and engages them, technological factors, what do we have available to us, etc. So you can see it's sort of it's a way of stimulating discussion, and if we think about all of these different external factors, and we're doing this collectively with a group of people with different perspectives, possibly people who are internal and external to your own organization as well. That's always worth thinking about. Then it's likely that we will capture a great many ideas and insights that will be useful when we're formulating our plan. So the next part of the estimate process is grow power. Power can be a number of different things. And power in this sense is the ability to achieve our goals, the ability to engage with this problem. That might be about resources. It can be about time, money, logistical resources, those sorts of things. But it's almost always likely also to be about people, influence, getting the right players of the game, key stakeholders on board and engaged in what it is that you're trying to do. The classic model for stakeholder mapping is the Mendeley matrix. And here what we do is we think about the key stakeholders that we need to engage with, and those could be budget holders, key customers or clients, employees, people in the local community that we operate within. It all depends entirely on what your problem is. But this is where we think about all the key stakeholders who will be involved in our plan and the challenge that we're trying to overcome. And then we think about how influential are these stakeholders, that's our y-axis there, and then how interested are they, how engaged are they in what we're trying to accomplish. It might be that you have extremely influential people who would sort of fall into the top left side of this model, who have absolutely no idea what we're trying to accomplish, and we might need to get them on board. So what we would need to think about is how would we move them from being high on influence but low on interest to high on influence but also high on interest. How do we engage with and influence those key stakeholders? So what might we need to think about? Well, how will I engage with and influence stakeholders? How do I solve their problems? What might their values, their goals be that we could work with here? The work that we're doing, how does that potentially positively impact or influence what they're also trying to accomplish and achieve? So there's probably an element of kind of really thinking about actually what motivates and drives our key stakeholders, what really matters to them, what are their beliefs about the situation, what are their goals and objectives, how do we engage with and relate to that so that the work that we're doing is relevant to them. I would say that in a great many instances, and when I look at, so going back to the COVID example, moving my own business into from traditional training to online, I had to talk to early adopter clients who were prepared to experiment and be subjected to some fairly rough and ready training experiences through Zoom. I had to talk to the accrediting bodies so that we could continue to run accreditations and that sort of thing. I had to talk to agents who we work through and help us to promote and communicate what we're doing, universities and business schools, that sort of thing. So dealing with that particularly challenging strategic problem, I would say that a great majority of my time was actually focused on dealing with our key stakeholders. So which stakeholders need to be involved? Where are they on the Mendeley matrix? And how do I engage with those stakeholders well? An ultimate step, generate opportunity. And we can see we've got the good old-fashioned SWOT analysis there. In particular, I think the thing to really think about is threats and opportunities. Now, it may be that there's some lovely low-hanging fruit, that there are some quick wins, there are some things that we can start to do that will move us forwards, or that might start to test some of our assumptions straight away. So again, COVID, I just very simply, I put together a 1-hour training course, and I put a Zoom link on LinkedIn, and I just said to everybody in my network, here's a Zoom link. If you'd like to come along, I'm going to give this a go on Thursday evening at 7:30. It's the first time I've done anything like that. Come along if you'd like to. So we're just using a bit of social media, Zoom link on LinkedIn, which, as I learned very quickly, it was a disastrous idea, but nonetheless, we learn as we go. Anyway, and that was it, and that got me up and running. And I prepared a little session, a little session on coaching skills, thinking that it might be a nice distraction for people during COVID. I was hoping that maybe half a dozen people would come along. In fact, I had over 90. In fact, it pretty much maxed out my what I was able to have on my Zoom account at that time. So, but actually, even though it was fairly horrifying, there was much good that came out of it, and certainly a lot of learning in relation to how to use these technologies. So there may be some things that you can do right away. Another way to look at this is to actually think, perhaps, well, what are the threats? What are the things which could stop us or block us or actively work against us? Are there things that we could do to engage with those threats to turn them to our advantage? Can we be a bit entrepreneurial and creative about how we engage with these threats? How do we turn these threats into our opportunities? There's a separate video to be done on that, on creative thinking, and really being entrepreneurial about threat is a fascinating topic. And then finally, we get to make a decision, the last part of our estimate. So having really worked through these things, we've identified the focus, we've developed our knowledge, we've thought about power and stakeholders, we've created opportunities where possible and begun to engage with our threats like entrepreneurs. Now we're ready to think about our decision. So what's the action plan? So what are we going to do first? Of course, We're not necessarily talking about long-term actions here. It's a myth that strategy needs to be long-term. I mean, sometimes it is, but actually, journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So, what is our plan? What are the first steps that we need to take? Then perhaps coming back to key stakeholders, or the people who we're going to need to delegate to and get involved in this. How are we going to communicate the plan? And the third part is then so how do we, what methods and how do we communicate this plan most effectively? So who needs to know, who are our key stakeholders, but then how do we communicate to them as effectively as possible? And the reason that third column is there is because something which often gets overlooked with strategy is that it often involves discretionary work. I tend to find that people are always very busy. And actually, if you're introducing a new plan or a new way of working, there always needs to be an element of goodwill there, I think, or certainly some type of incentivization. So if we're asking people to do something new, discretionary, extra, above what they're already doing, there probably needs to be some thinking around how do we communicate it in a way that's appealing, that gets buy-in and creates a level of engagement. Sending out the email is unlikely to do it. It's going to be about actually, really being able to sort of spend time with people, look them in the eyes and really try to get them on board behind what it is that you're trying to accomplish. So selling the idea to some extent may be part of how you communicate it. So that's it, really. That brings me to the end. And of course, you take some action. You go into the world. You communicate. You delegate. You begin to take actions, or you begin to experiment as you move forwards. And then you'll learn new things. And it may well be then that you need to go around again. So when you begin to take action against a challenge, it may be that you discover that the problem isn't what you thought it was. That there may be a different problem actually that sort of sits underneath it that we've started to identify. As you create new knowledge, engage with new stakeholders, it may be that your landscape changes. And so then we go around again. There are lots of different ways of doing this, but personally, I think it's probably at its best when you can bring a group of people together to work systematically through this, just because you're getting different perspectives and that sort of viewpoint diversity, which can often be the start point of some really creative ideas and original solutions for dealing with the challenge. But then, even actually just reflectively doing this, asking yourself these questions when you're, out on the hills or walking the dogs can be quite good to sort of stimulate that thought. When you've got something complex to do, or a difficult problem to solve, these are points and thought processes which will help you to deal with it systematically and maybe help you to catch a few things that you might otherwise have missed. As you can see, it doesn't tell you what the right answer does, but it guides you to think about what should you be paying attention to. So there we go. That's my second little video on strategy. I hope that it's been helpful, and I hope you're benefiting from this series of videos in general. Thank you very much indeed for your time.